It's interesting that Zelensky just went, we're doing it, because
Hmm.
he's probably been wanting to do this for a while. But of course, he's using gifted. He's
Yeah,
using gifted military equipment, and and with those gifts come caveats. You can use our missiles here, but you can't do this. You can defend, but please don't go into Russia. We don't want it to be seen as a NATO attack. And it was the NATO summit over the summer where he was literally introduced onto the stage by Biden as Vladimir Putin instead of as
yeah.
Zelensky, that he realized that he needs to take advantage of Biden's weakened state in order to make any progress.
That's interesting. Guys, I wanted to ask you about the war in Ukraine, because big news this week, it continued, but it's no longer just a war in Ukraine, because the invader has become the invadee, as parts of Russia have fallen in the direction of the city of Kursk. It's hard to know what to think about this beyond the fact that it's simply astonishing. It's always been surprising that Russia, one of the world's greatest superpowers, could not swiftly subdue Ukraine, its sort of much weaker neighbor. But the fact that it can't even defend its own territory is just deeply, deeply unexpected. If America couldn't defend its own territory, you'd be astonished. And Russia, until very recently, did consider itself to be America's sort of military equal. Sarah, what do you make of this week's developments?
I felt unaccustomadly well informed about geopolitics because I'd just been working on the 50 years of the Sunday Times bestsellers list, which I think is in the paper
Yeah.
tomorrow. And one of the books that I'd revisited in that was called Prisoners of Geography, about the role of, geography in geopolitics, which starts out, I think it was published in 2016, so it predates the invasion of Ukraine. But the first instance it gives in the introduction is that Russia will always have to try and take Ukraine because geographically it will always be vulnerable to invasion from Ukraine. So even though Ukraine is substantially smaller, even though it's always going to be hugely prone to invasion because of its value as a food source, it has these geographical features, which I can't now remember. I mean, it'd be great if I could, which means that militarily, it's very hard to invade, and it has a huge advantage in terms of being able to invade from there. So I think
that's
we're just kind of
fascinating.
seeing, the cycles of history repeat.
That's really, really fascinating. Ria,
Well, it certainly
yeah.
explains why they annexed Crimea in 2014.
Yeah, well, exactly.
To
Yeah.
get that anchor back there in the Black Sea.
Do you think, from the perspective of Vladimir Putin, it makes him look awful weak, doesn't it?
It does. And actually, I think it's interesting that Zelensky just went, we're doing it, because he's probably been wanting to do this for a while. But of course, he's using gifted military equipment, and and with those gifts come caveats. You can use our missiles here, but you can't do this. You can defend, but please don't go into Russia. We don't want it to be seen as a NATO attack. And it was the NATO summit over the summer where he was literally introduced onto the stage by Biden as Vladimir Putin instead of as Zelensky, that he realized that he needs to take advantage of Biden's weakened state in order to make any progress.
That's interesting.
And so off the back of that, he went, I'm doing it. And he did. And it's obviously caught the Russians off guard, but I think the Russians quite arrogantly also assumed that Ukraine would continue to follow these caveats.
Yeah.
And they've it's going to cause trouble in Russia, because he's now going to need to mobilize even more forces in order to counteract this invasion and this incursion. We know that he seems to be what's it called? Again, what's the word when you mobilize? He's mobilizing people in Kaliningrad, which we've heard from Lithuania. So it's going to be interesting to see the effect that this has, because it makes the military look weak, which is not. And if it was the first time, maybe they could survive it. But this is the second time that they've been incursed. Is that a word? Incursed, because of what happened last year with I can't remember his name, but the paid, the guy that went in and got almost to Moscow and then stopped, and then later was killed in a plane crash.
Progovny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Progovny. So, so this is the second time that the Russian military has egg on its face, and that can really cause problems.
There was a fantastic joke that came out of Ukraine really quite a long time ago now, maybe 18 months ago, about a couple of Ukrainian peasants having a conversation, saying one of them, the other, did you hear that World War III started between Russia and NATO? And another one said, no, I hadn't heard. What's happening? They go, Russia's lost so much territory and all these troops and most of its tanks, and its air force isn't working, and it's humiliated and defeated. And the other one goes, and what's happening with NATO? And he goes, oh, NATO hasn't got there yet. And so that is kind of the dynamic. I mean, one does expect from everything one reads that something of a turnaround is pending, and Russia will be pushing back. But it's a fascinating time to be watching this conflict that's gone on, I think, sort of so much longer than anyone ever expected it to at the beginning.
110.
Що не буде кому мене пофотографувати, треба хоч другого.
Є, я можу пофоткати.
Він буде.
З мене фотограф.
Лицо не снимать только. Желательно.
Але не видно.
Що?
Ага.
Ну, лице надо генерировать. Бачите? От того куща. От того куща? Да. І туди до вас.
Так, я займаю позицію. Давай, Роман.
Можна працювати з-під цього дерева, можна працювати з того дерева. Все залежить від того, який у тебе сектор, що ти дивишся і на що.
Може, не стісняйся. На 12 воно бачив.
Ніхуя.
На бочці теж стоїть.